So, because our lives and our actions are more than just an infinite series of lines on a dot or chain of dominoes, our own lives, our own finite lives and actions take on a heightened quality and an individuated tone, and our actions in turn become a profound commentary. Our every action becomes a profound commentary on ourselves and who we are, and they allow us to actually choose our own essence as radically free beings against the notion of the they self, the predetermined essence which belongs to something other than our own finite essence which we determine, the predetermined essence of some high-minded metaphysical scheme which has our place in the world and in the afterlife, in the other world as well. These are otherworldly concepts, and the idea of being infinite in the sense of literally transcending the flesh and entering into some eternal paradise or hell, or just some eternal plane after this consciousness passes on, necessarily entails that you yourself are not in control of your destiny. That is to say, that you belong to someone else's paradigm. You don't create your own. You belong to somebody else's scheme of the universe. You don't create your own meaning. It's already inherent, and therefore whatever way you live your life is relatively insignificant. You're just going to fall into one of a few final outcomes or afterlives which are already predetermined and which you have very little say in determining. You certainly didn't create those planes of existence. The only thing you have the capacity to create is your own life, your own essence, and your own meaning. And I believe that can only be done satisfactorily by understanding that we, as finite beings, are necessarily so, and all of our meaning at that point, all of our every action we take becomes so much more metaphysical, so much more profound. It's what defines us, because our every action is our own self-definition. And so really, I guess what I want to say is that if death is to be transcendent, that is to say that life is to be escaped, that responsibility for our own actions as the ultimate definition of ourselves, which I believe could be the only coherent definition of ourselves. If this is passed over, then we truly have no means by which we can define our own essence. It's already been defined. We're just falling into one of a few ultimate scenarios which have been set up without us having anything at all to do with those scenarios. And so really, if you want to be truly individuated and truly authentic as a human being, to truly understand what it is to be a being in this world, I don't think that can be accomplished but for understanding yourself as a necessarily finite being who has all the power in the world to create himself to be precisely as he intends. Now, if I could make an addendum to this video as well, I said I'd like to talk about Schopenhauer. You brought up Schopenhauer, and I think it's a very interesting thing that you did. This was essentially your attempt, I guess, at proving or at least giving some credence to the idea of an infinity within our essence. And I'm predominantly arguing here from a moral, ethical standpoint. Not so much a ontological or metaphysical one, but I'd like to address this idea anyway. You didn't go into too much detail, but I know what you were talking about when you spoke of Schopenhauer. The entire premise of Schopenhauer's thought is that the thing in itself, the ultimate reality, which we are which certainly Kant believed that we are blind to, the driving force of all that is, in Schopenhauer's view, is somewhat accessible, and this is the will, the supreme will. You could call it the will in itself, I suppose. And in Schopenhauer's understanding, this is what drives all action. You could almost call it causality, I suppose, to be scientific, to use a few scientific terms. But at any rate, this is the ultimate, inherent, and incessant force within the universe, and it is manifested individually in finite human beings as our individual wills, or if you will, to use the Kantian terminology, the noumenal world, the world as it is without our own perceptions, just as it is in itself. That is the supreme will. That is simply the will in itself, and our own individual wills, our own finite wills, they are phenomenal representations. So in Schopenhauer's view, the reason he's such a pessimist is because he understands that what we see as finite human beings are ultimately mere representations of a singular will outside of ourselves, which we are a part of in his scheme of things, an infinite. We are ultimately infinite beings. Our own finite wills are derivations of the will itself. But because we are simply derivations of something outside of ourselves, our own lives are rather shallow and hollow and destined to be unfulfilled in Schopenhauer's understanding, because the will itself is it can never be fulfilled, because it exists necessarily to recreate itself, and so all of our own desires and aims are destined to be either unfulfilled or to simply be replaced immediately by another desire or aspiration. We can never truly be satisfied in the world of representation, and that's why in Schopenhauer's conception of the world, that the highest most metaphysical, ecstatic undertaking one can engage in is the arts, specifically music, because it engages the least in the world as representation, the world as we see it, as beings in the world, in this finite will-driven, in our own finite will-driven sphere of things. And that's where he got his appreciation for Wagner and his otherworldly type of music. And just our artists in general are held in very high regard, precisely because they're able to take leave of as beings in the world for a moment, and through pure contemplation, they're not so much driven by worldly desires, if you will. And that's very certainly ennobling in my point of view from the standpoint of the artist. But in a way, it sort of highlights my own point of view and my own disagreement with the idea of infinity, because when you look at Schopenhauer's philosophy of his necessarily pessimistic philosophy, you find that because we are derivations of the will that in itself, that we are ultimately powerless. And that what is Schopenhauer's answer to this? Well, it's in a way similar to theological answers. It's to escape the will, to escape this world, not through an eternal afterlife, but through a sort of subjective contemplation, which is certainly, I think, a much better answer to that, and can be very enlightening. But it is still escapism, and it is still sort of the antithesis of the existentialist ethic. You could be described as fleeing from the world versus confronting it. I don't want to say cowering necessarily, but you could frame it in that way, of cowering in the face of our total freedom as radically free, contingent beings, in the face of that infinite, of our own infinite power, and fleeing from the world as it is into our own internal world, away from our own personal obligations as beings in the world.